双语音标领航，注音阅读启蒙，叶兴阳有声读物。
A Knight of the Cumberland by John Fox Jr. Contents:
I.
The Blight in the Hills.
2.
On the Wild Dog's Trail.
3.
The Auricular Talent of the Han. Samuel Budd.
4.
Close Quarters. V. Back to the Hills. 6. The Great Day. 7. At Last the Tournament. 8. The Night Passes. A Knight of the Cumberland.
I.
The Blight in the Hills. High noon of a crisp October day. Sunshine flooding the earth with the warmth and light of old wine, and, going single file up through the jagged gap that the dripping of water has worn down through the Cumberland Mountains from crest to valley level, a gray horse and 2 big mules, a man and 2 young girls. On the gray horse, I led the tortuous way. After me came my small sister, and after her, and like her, mule back, rode the Blight dressed as she would be for a gallop in Central Park or to ride a hunter in a horse show. I was taking them, according to promise, where the feet of other women than mountaineers had never trod beyond the crest of the big black to the waters of the Cumberland, the lair of moonshiner and feudsman, where as yet pocketed a civilization that, elsewhere, is long ago gone. This had been a pet dream of the Blights for a long time, and now the dream was coming true. The Blight was in the hills. Nobody ever went to her mother's house without asking to see her, even when she was a little thing with black hair, merry face and black eyes. Both men and women, with children of their own, have told me that she was, perhaps, the most fascinating child that ever lived. There be some who claim that she has never changed, and I am among them. She began early, regardless of age, sex, or previous condition of servitude. She continues recklessly as she began, and none makes complaint. Thus was it in her own world, thus it was when she came to mine. On the way down from the north, the conductor's voice changed from a command to a request when he asked for her ticket. The jacketed lord of the dining car saw her from afar and advanced to show her to a seat that she might ride forward, sit next to a shaded window, and be free from the glare of the sun on the other side. 2 porters made a rush for her bag when she got off the car, and the proprietor of the little hotel in the little town where we had to wait several hours for the train into the mountains gave her the bridal chamber for an afternoon nap. From this little town to the Gap is the worst 60-mile ride, perhaps, in the world. She sat in a dirty day coach. The smoke rolled in at the windows and doors. The cars shook and swayed and lumbered around curves and down and up gorges. There were about her rough men, crying children, slatternly women, tobacco juice, peanuts, popcorn and apple cores. But dainty, serene, and as merry as ever, she sat through that ride with a radiant smile, her keen black eyes noting everything unlovely within and the glory of hill, tree, and chasm without. Next morning at home, where we rise early, no one was allowed to waken her, and she had breakfast in bed, for the Blight's gentle tyranny was established on sight and varied not at the Gap. When she went down the street that day, everybody stared surreptitiously and with perfect respect as her dainty black-plumed figure passed. The post office clerk could barely bring himself to say that there was no letter for her. The soda fountain boy nearly filled her glass with syrup before he saw that he was not strictly minding his own business. The clerk, when I bought chocolate for her, unblushingly added extra weight, and, as we went back, she met them both, Marston, the young engineer from the north, crossing the street, and, at the same moment, a drunken young tough, with an infuriated face, reeling in a run around the corner ahead of us, as though he were being pursued. Now we have a volunteer police guard, some 40 strong, at the Gap, and from habit, I started for him, but the Blight caught my arm tight. The young engineer in 3 strides had reached the curbstone, and all he sternly said was, "Here, here." The drunken youth wheeled, and his right hand shot toward his hip pocket. The engineer was belted with a pistol, but with one lightning movement and an incredibly long reach. His right fist caught the fellow's jaw so that he pitched backward and collapsed like an empty bag. Then the engineer caught sight of the Blight's bewildered face. flushed, gripped his hands in front of him, and simply stared. At last he saw me.
"Oh,"
he said. "How do you do?" And he turned to his prisoner. But the panting sergeant and another policeman, also a volunteer, were already lifting him to his feet. I introduced the boy, and the blight then. And for the first time in my life, I saw the blight shaken. Rounded. She merely gazed at him. "That was pretty well done," I said.
"Oh."
He was drunk, and I knew he would be slow. Now something curious happened. The dazed prisoner was on his feet, and his captors were starting with him to the calaboose when he seemed suddenly to come to his senses. "Just wait a minute, will ye?" he said quietly, and his captors, thinking perhaps that he wanted to say something to me,
stopped.
The mountain youth turned a strangely sobered face and fixed his blue eyes on the engineer as though he were searing every feature of that imperturbable young man in his brain forever. It was not a bad face, but the avenging hatred in it was fearful.
Then he, too,
saw the blight. His face calmed magically, and he,
too,
stared at her and turned away with an oath checked at his lips. We went on, the blight thrilled, for she had heard much of our volunteer force at the Gap and had seen something already. Presently I looked back. Prisoner and captors were climbing the little hill toward the calaboose, and the mountain boy just then turned his head, and I could swear that his eyes sought not the engineer, whom we left at the corner, but, like the engineer,
he was looking at the blight.
Whereat I did not wonder particularly as to the engineer. He had been in the mountains for a long time, and I knew what this vision from home meant to him. He turned up at the house quite early that night. "I'm not on duty until 11, he said hesitantly, and I thought I'd come right in. Asked him a few questions about business, and then I left him and the blight alone. When I came back, she had a Gatling gun of eager questions ranged on him, and happy withal he was squirming no little. I followed him to the gate. "Are you really going over into those godforsaken mountains?" he asked. "I thought I would." "And you are going to take her? And my sister?"
"Oh."
"I beg your pardon." He strode away. "Coming up by the mines?" he called back. "Perhaps will you show us around?" "I guess I will," he said emphatically, and he went on to risk his neck on a 10-mile ride along a mountain road in the dark. "I like a man," said the blight. "I like a man." Of course the blight must see everything. So she insisted on going to the police court next morning for the trial of the mountain boy. The boy was in the witness chair when we got there, and the Hon. Samuel Budd was his counsel. He had volunteered to defend the prisoner. I was soon told, and then I understood. The November election was not far off, and the Hon. Samuel Budd was candidate for legislature. More even, the boy's father was a warm supporter of Mr. Budd, and the boy himself might perhaps render good service in the cause when the time came, as indeed he did. On one of the front chairs sat the young engineer, and it was a question whether he or the prisoner saw the blight's black plumes first. The eyes of both flashed toward her simultaneously. The engineer colored perceptibly, and the mountain boy stopped short in speech, and his pallid face flushed with unmistakable shame. Then he went on. "He had liquored up," he said, "and had got tight afore he knowed it, and he didn't mean no harm, and had never been arrested afore in his whole life." "Have you ever been drunk before?" asked the prosecuting attorney severely. The lad looked surprised. "Coassy I have, but I ain't goin' to Agen, leastwise not in this here town." There was a general laugh at this, and the aged mayor rapped loudly. "That will do," said the attorney. The lad stepped down, hitched his chair slightly so that his back was to the blight, sank down in it until his head rested on the back of the chair, and crossed his legs. The Honorable Samuel Budd arose, and the blight looked at him with wonder. His long yellow hair was parted in the middle and brushed with plaster-like precision behind two enormous ears. He wore spectacles, gold-rimmed, and with great staring lenses, and his face was smooth and ageless. He caressed his chin ruminatingly and rolled his lips until they settled into a fine resultant of wisdom, patience, toleration, and firmness. His manner was profound, and his voice oily and soothing. "May it please your honor, my young friend frankly pleads guilty." He paused as though the majesty of the law could ask no more. "He is a young man of naturally high, and somewhat naturally,
2.
no doubt bibulous spirits. Homoepathically, if inversely the result was logical. In the untrammeled life of the liberty, breathing mountains, where the stern spirit of law and order, of which your honor is the august symbol, does not prevail as it does here thanks to your honor's wise and just dispensations the lad has, I may say, naturally acquired a certain recklessness of mood indulgence which, however easily condoned there, must here be sternly rebuked. At the same time, he knew not the conditions here. He became exhilarated without malice, propensity, or even, I may say, consciousness. He would not have done as he has, if he had known what he knows now, and, knowing, he will not repeat the offense. I need say no more. I plead simply that your honor will temper the justice that is only yours with the mercy that is yours only. His honor was visibly affected, and to cover it his methods being informal he said with sharp irrelevancy, "Who bailed this young feller out last night?" The sergeant spoke.
"Why?"
Mr. Marston thar with outstretched finger toward the young engineer. The Blight's black eyes leaped with exultant appreciation, and the engineer turned crimson. His honor rolled his quid around in his mouth once, and peered over his glasses. "I fine this young feller $2 and costs." The young fellow had turned slowly in his chair, and his blue eyes blazed at the engineer with unappeasable hatred. I doubt if he had heard his honor's voice. "I want you to know that I'm obleeged to ye, and I ain't a-goin' to forget it. But if I'd a-known hit was you I'd a-stayed in jail. And seen you in hell afore, I'd a-been bounden to ye. $10 fair contempt of caught." The boy was hot now.
"Oh."
Fine and be. The Honorable Samuel Budd had him by the shoulder. The boy swallowed his voice and his starting tears of rage, and after a whisper to his honor, the Hon, Samuel led him out. Outside, the engineer laughed to the Blight. "Pretty peppery, isn't he?" But the Blight said nothing, and later we saw the youth on a gray horse crossing the bridge and conducted by the Hon, Samuel Budd, who stopped and waved him toward the mountains. The boy went on and across the plateau. The gray gap swallowed him. That night, at the post office, the Hon, Sam plucked me aside by the sleeve. "I know Marston is egging me in this race, but I'll do him a good turn just the same. You tell him to watch out for that young fellow. He's all right when he's sober, but when he's drunk, well, over in Kentucky, they call him the wild dog." Several days later we started out through that same gap. The glum stableman looked at the Blight's girths 3 times, and with my own eyes starting and my heart in my mouth, I saw her pass behind her 16-hand-high mule and give him a friendly tap on the rump as she went by. The beast gave an appreciative flop of one ear, and that was all. Had I done that, any further benefit to me or mine would be incorporated in the terms of an insurance policy. So, stating this, I believe I state the limit and can now go on to say at last that it was because she seemed to be loved by man and brute alike that a big man of her own town, whose body, big as it was yet too small for his heart, and from whose brain things went off at queer angles, always christened her perversely as the Blight.
2.
On the wild dog's trail. So up we went past Bee Rock, Preacher's Creek and Little Looney, past the mines where high on a tipple stood the young engineer looking down at us, and looking after the Blight as we passed on into a dim rocky avenue walled on each side with rhododendrons. I waved at him and shook my head we would see him coming back. Beyond a deserted log cabin we turned up a spur of the mountain. Around a clump of bushes we came on a gray-bearded mountaineer holding his horse by the bridle, and from a covert high above 2 more men appeared with Winchesters. The Blight breathed forth an odd whisper. "Are they moonshiners?" I nodded sagely. "Most likely." And the Blight was thrilled. They might have been squirrel hunters most innocent, But the blight had heard much talk of moonshine stills and mountain feuds and the men who run them, and I took the risk of denying her nothing. Up and up we went, those two mules swaying from side to side with a motion little short of elephantine, and by, the blight called out, "You ride ahead and don't you dare look back." Accustomed to obeying the blight's orders, I rode ahead with eyes to the front. Presently, a shriek made me turn suddenly. It was nothing. My little sister's mule had gone near a steep cliff perilously near, as its rider thought, but I saw why I must not look back. Those two little girls were riding astride on side saddles, the booted little right foot of each dangling stirrup-laissé posture quite decorous, but ludicrous. "Let us know if anybody comes," they cried. A mountaineer descended into sight around a loop of the path above. "Change cars," I shouted. They changed and, passing, were grave. Demure then they changed again, and thus we climbed. Such a glory as was below, around and above us. The air like champagne, the sunlight rich and pouring like a flood on the gold that the beeches had strewn in the path, on the gold that the poplars still shook high above, and shimmering on the royal scarlet of the maple and the somber russet of the oak. From far below us to far above us a deep curving ravine was slashed into the mountainside as by one stroke of a gigantic scimitar. The darkness deep down was lighted up with cool green, interfused with liquid gold. Russet and yellow splashed the mountainsides beyond, and high up the maples were in a shaking blaze. The blight's swift eyes took all in, and with indrawn breath, she drank it all deep down. An hour by sun, we were near the top, which was bared of trees, and turned into rich farmland covered with bluegrass. Along these upland pastures, dotted with grazing cattle, and across them we rode toward the mountain wildernesses on the other side, down into which a zigzag path wriggles along the steep front of Benham's Spur. At the edge of the steep was a cabin, and a bushy-bearded mountaineer, who looked like a brigand, answered my hail. He mought keep us all night, but he'd ruth or not, as we could get a place to stay down the spur. Could we get down before dark? The mountaineer lifted his eyes to where the sun was breaking the horizon of the west into streaks and splashes of yellow and crimson.
"Oh,
"Yes, you can get there afore dark." Now I knew that the mountaineer idea of distance is vague, but he knows how long it takes to get from one place to another. So we started down, dropping at once into thick dark woods. And as we went looping down, the deeper was the gloom. That sun had suddenly severed all connection with the laws of gravity and sunk. And it was all the darker because the stars were not out. The path was steep and coiled downward like a wounded snake. In one place a tree had fallen across it, and to reach the next coil of the path below was dangerous. So I had the girls dismount, and I led the gray horse down on his haunches. The mules refused to follow, which was rather unusual. I went back, and from a safe distance in the rear, I belabored them down. They cared neither for gray horse nor crooked path, but turned of their own devilish wills along the bushy mountainside. As I ran after them, the gray horse started calmly on down, and those two girls shrieked with laughter. They knew no better. First one way, and then the other down the mountain, went those mules, with me after them, through thick bushes, over logs, stumps and boulders, and holes crossing the path a dozen times. What that path was there for never occurred to those long-eared half-asses, whole fools, and by, when the girls tried to shoo them down, they clambered around and above them and struck the path back up the mountain. The horse had gone down one way, the mules up the other, and there was no health in anything. The girls could not go up, so there was nothing to do but go down, which,
hard as it was
easier than going up. The path was not visible now. Once in a while I would stumble from it and crash through the bushes to the next coil below. Finally I went down, sliding one foot ahead, all the time knowing that when leaves rustled under that foot, I was on the point of going astray. Sometimes I had to light a match to make sure of the way, and thus the ridiculous descent was made with those girls in high spirits behind.
indeed.
The darker, rockier, steeper it got. The more they shrieked from pure joy, but I was anything than happy. It was dangerous. I didn't know the cliffs and high rocks we might skirt, and an unlucky guidance might land us in the creek bed far down. But the blessed stars came out. The moon peered over a farther mountain, and on the last spur there was the gray horse browsing in the path and the sound of running water not far below. Fortunately, on the gray horse were the saddlebags of the chattering infants who thought the whole thing a mighty lark. We reached the running water, struck a flock of geese, and knew, in consequence, that humanity was somewhere near. A few turns of the creek, and a beacon light shone below. The pales of a picket fence, the cheering outlines of a log cabin came in view, and, at a peaked gate, I shouted, "Hello! You enter no mountaineer yard without that announcing cry." It was medieval, the blight said. Positively two lorn damsels. A benighted knight partially stripped of his armor by bush and sharp-edged rock. A grey palfrey. She didn't mention the impatient asses that had turned homeward, and she wished I had a horn to wind. I wanted a horn, badly enough, but it was not the kind men wind. By we got a response. "Hello," was the answer, as an open door let out into the yard a broad band of light. Could we stay all night? The voice replied that the owner would see Pap. Pap seemed willing, and the boy opened the gate, and into the house went the blight and the little sister. Shortly, I followed. There, all in one room, lighted by a huge wood fire, rafters above, puncheon floor beneath cane-bottomed chairs, and two beds the only furniture, Pap, barefooted, the old mother in the chimney corner with a pipe, strings of red pepper, pods, beans and herbs hanging around and above, a married daughter with a child at her breast, 2 or 3 children with yellow hair and bare feet, all looking with all their eyes at the 2 visitors who had dropped upon them from another world. The blight's eyes were brighter than usual. That was the only sign she gave that she was not in her own drawing room. Apparently she saw nothing strange or unusual even. But there was really nothing that she did not see or hear and absorb, as few others than the blight can. Straightway, the old woman knocked the ashes out of her pipe. "I reckon you hain't had nothin' to eat," she said, and disappeared. The old man asked questions. The young mother rocked her baby on her knees. The children got less shy and drew near the fireplace. The blight and the little sister exchanged a furtive smile, and the contrast of the extremes in American civilization, as shown in that little cabin, interested me mightily. "Your snack's ready," said the old woman. The old man carried the chairs into the kitchen, and when I followed, the girls were seated. The chairs were so low that their chins came barely over their plates, and demure and serious as they were, they surely looked most comical. There was the usual bacon and cornbread and potatoes and sour milk, and the 2 girls struggled with the rude fare nobly. After supper, I joined the old man and the old woman with a pipe, exchanging my tobacco for their long green with more satisfaction probably to me than to them, for the long green was good, and strong and fragrant. The old woman asked the blight and the little sister many questions, and they, in turn, showed great interest in the baby in arms, whereat the 18-year-old mother blushed and looked greatly pleased. "You got mighty pretty black eyes," said the old woman to the blight, and not to slight the little sister, she added, "and you got mighty pretty teeth." The blight showed hers in a radiant smile, and the old woman turned back to her.
"Oh,
"You've got both," she said, and she shook her head, as though she were thinking of the damage they had done. It was my time now to ask questions. They didn't have many amusements on that creek, I discovered, and no dances. Sometimes the boys went coon hunting, and there were corn shuckings, house raisings, and quilting parties. "Does anybody round here play the banjo?" "None o' my boys," said the old woman, "but Tom Green's son down the creek, he follers pickin' the banjo a leetle." Follows pickin'. The blight did not miss that phrase. "What do you foller for a livin'?" the old man asked me suddenly. "I write for a living,"